He's been called the greatest illusionist of our time, but will David Copperfield be able to escape from the latest allegations against him? We're taking a closer look at new accusations of sexual misconduct against the world-famous magician with former sex crimes prosecutor Sarena Townsend. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. David Copperfield is the latest celebrity to face a slew of sexual misconduct allegations. The U.S. division of the UK-based Guardian newspaper says 16 women have come forward to them with accusations against the 67-year-old. Some of these claims are from incidents they allege happened decades ago. Now, more than half of those women claim that they were under the age of 18 when these things happened. Some of the women have told their stories before. Others are making claims for the first time. Right now, there doesn't seem to be any legal action against David Copperfield in connection with these accusations, and that's what they are right now, accusations, allegations. But that is, of course, always a possibility. It's something I want to explore right now with former sex crimes prosecutor Sarena Townsend. Sarena, good to see you.
Thank you.
Shocking to see this. I mean, I think for me, the last time I thought about David Copperfield was, well, to get to it in a minute, he was mentioned briefly in the Epstein docs, but 2018, he had this lawsuit filed against him for one of his shows. Somebody had got injured. He was actually found negligent, but not financially responsible. Haven't thought about David Copperfield in a while. We see this headline from The Guardian. What's your impression?
My impression is when you have 16 people come forward who don't know each other and tell stories of sexual abuse or even rape in some of the cases, there is some credibility right out the gate to those stories. It feels that way, at least, because these women don't know each other. And like you said, nobody has thought of David Copperfield that much recently. So it doesn't feel like, these women are coming forward because they sense that they can make a dollar or two out of him. It feels like the timing is such that, maybe something did happen. And now that these women are older, they're looking back in hindsight and saying, something was wrong here, and I want to come out with my story.
And sometimes we see that. We see papers do exposés on people. Same thing happened with Harvey Weinstein with the New York Times. It sometimes comes out of nowhere. So here are some of the allegations that these women are making, which span from the late 1980s to 2014. At least 3 women say they believe they were drugged by the magician, then they were sexually assaulted by him. The Guardian reports it also heard stories about Copperfield groping women or making them touch him suggestively during live stage performances in front of an audience. One of the women who had come forward previously was Brittany Lewis. In 2018, she spoke with the entertainment outlet The Wrap. The site also interviewed her family and friends who say that she told them decades ago about an alleged assault by David Copperfield. In 1988, Lewis was a 17-year-old model competing in the Look of the Year contest in Japan. Copperfield was apparently one of the judges. And when she returned back to the United States, she says David Copperfield invited her to one of his shows in California. Her grandmother agreed to let her go. She says that she was treated to a VIP experience. She told The Wrap that she was with Copperfield at the hotel bar when she saw him allegedly putting something in her drink, and she later blacked out. She says that she has these hazy memories of Copperfield taking off her clothes, being on top of her. He sent her home to Utah the following day, telling her nothing had happened because she was a minor, but also insisting that she write a letter saying she was all right. Lewis told the outlet that she doesn't plan to pursue any civil or criminal action against Copperfield, but felt emboldened to speak out thanks to the Me Too movement. So the big question I have for you, Sarena, and that's kind of a sampling of it, do you expect any kind of legal consequences, either criminal or civil, for David Copperfield after the release of this expose by The Guardian?
It would require the cooperation of each of the women in order for a civil or criminal lawsuit to be pursued. So if they are telling, a tell-all to a magazine or a newspaper, but they're not pursuing charges, then it's going to be quite unlikely that we're going to see anything come of it. But at the same token, if they are looking for justice, or, if they're looking for some sort of either compensation or some sort of jail time for David Copperfield, they're going to have to pursue it in the courts. And at that point, they are going to have to face cross-examination and examination of their credibility.
A lot of this will also be based purely on their testimony and not on physical evidence or digital evidence, right? So that it would really all come down to them a lot of times.
That's right. And it's very difficult. I mean, there are people who don't say what happened to them for a long time because of shame, embarrassment, fear of retaliation, or fear that they're not going to be believed. We see this all of the time. It's called a delayed outcry. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're not credible, but at the same time, it does sometimes make it that much harder for, let's say, a prosecutor to move forward with a criminal case because the evidence, if it had existed back then, is no longer there. It's just usually the testimony of this woman or these women.
But from a criminal point of view or a civil point of view, isn't there an issue of statute of limitations? These claims are too old?
It is very interesting. It would go state by state. The statute of limitations could have run in several of these cases. But for example, in New York, there's been a recent reopening of that window called the Adult Survivors Act, where people can, sue their perpetrators even when the statute of limitations had actually expired. There was a look back and a reopening of the opportunity to do that. So these women will have to determine, or their lawyers will have to determine state by state, whether that look back exists or whether for some reason the statute was told. And there are possible, loopholes there for these women to move forward with cases.
As we talk about the potential legal ramifications of this case with David Copperfield, let me highlight one of our great partners and sponsors here on Sidebar, Morgan & Morgan. This is a firm that are specialists in the litigation arena. In fact, Morgan & Morgan is America's largest injury law firm, and for a reason. They win a lot. They have secured multi-million-dollar verdicts and settlements. In fact, they secured a $120 million verdict in one of the first personal injury trials post-pandemic. And by the way, in that case, there was a pretrial offer of just $20,000. Yeah, Morgan & Morgan, they don't settle for lowball offers. They will fight to protect your legal rights and for what you deserve in compensation. But one of the best things about Morgan & Morgan is how easy they make this whole process for their clients. From submitting your claim to uploading documents to signing contracts to talking to your legal team, it can all be done from your smartphone. That's it. Seeing if you have a case only takes a few minutes. And there's no upfront fee. Yeah, I forgot to mention that. No upfront fee. You only pay them if you win. So if you've ever been injured in an accident, you can check out Morgan & Morgan. You can start a claim in 8 clicks or less without even having to leave your couch. To start your claim, visit forthepeople.com/LC Sidebar or by dialing pound law. That's pound 529 on your phone. Now, in a statement to the Wrap, Copperfield's representative said in part, quote, "Most of these historic accusations have been made before, and all of them are as false now as they were then. David requested the evidence upon which these false allegations claim to rely, and this has not been provided. By contrast, whenever U.S. law enforcement has looked into such matters, they have been investigated thoroughly, and it has been found that there is simply no case to answer. The Guardian's characterization is not who David is, and he continues to support anyone who has experienced any form of abuse or discrimination." And the rep added, "David will be considering the position with his legal team and will take such steps as may be appropriate over these false and scurrilous allegations." Does that mean a lawsuit? Does that mean a defamation lawsuit?
Right. And so if these women are going to come forward only with a newspaper article or without moving forward into a courtroom where their credibility can be tested by cross-examination or either, evidence or a lack thereof, then it's, the person who's being accused doesn't have the ability to confront their accuser in that way. They don't have the ability necessarily to say in public, here's my evidence, or here's the cross-examination where we are able to discredit these allegations. And therefore, they could claim, if this has any financial effect on his reputation or on his business, that these statements are libelous, slanderous, and he might be able to file a defamation lawsuit. Keep in mind, though, with defamation, truth is a defense. So he's going to have to wade very carefully into that legal field and be ready for that potential confrontation of the truth or untruths.
But that means he would also go after the Guardian, right? And if he does, I have to imagine the Guardian must have gone through a number of different protocols before they write an article like this against, such a high-powered, high-profile individual.
Sure. There are a lot of rules that, newspapers and magazines have to follow before writing their stories. Not only do they have to cover, themselves by looking at whatever evidence they can get a hold of, but they also have to couch their language as a form of, this is an allegation. They can't say that this actually happened. And I do think that The Guardian and other news outlets have done that. They've been able to say, while these women are saying X, Y, and Z, don't forget these are just allegations. And they have also posted his side of the story, his statement through his attorneys. So they have probably
Yep.
been able to cover themselves.
Look, these are really harrowing allegations. And we're talking about another high profile, very powerful, wealthy individual. I mean, David Copperfield has been a staple in the magic game for as long as I remember. He made the Statue of Liberty disappear in New York, back in 1983. He's won, I think, 21 Emmy Awards, holds 11 Guinness World Records. He's a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. I think he was knighted by the French government. He's I think he's listed, by the way, as a living legend by the U.S. Library of Congress. He's been in Vegas for decades. I've seen his show so many times. And whenever we talk about allegations against somebody of his stature, there isn't always a thought, they're going for the money grab. They're going after him because he's rich and famous. How is that complicated here in terms of David Copperfield?
Absolutely. Any good prosecutor or any litigator knows that when you go up against a celebrity, you cannot ignore their celebrity status. You can make that argument in both directions, by the way. You can make the argument that because he's a celebrity, this is why these women are saying it. They are looking for money. They're looking for some sort of fame. It never really happened. On the other hand, you can say, because he was a celebrity, perhaps he did take advantage of his stature and he knew that nobody was going to go up against him because he was too valuable. His status as a magician, by the way, I mean, one could argue if he was able to make the Statue of Liberty disappear, what other kind of illusions was he able to do in order to trick these women or to trick his audience? It all is so important to take into consideration. Even if he were, let's say, to take the stand in a criminal case or a civil case, how does that affect a jury? Does a jury look at him as a showman and therefore they don't believe him? Or do they look at him in awe because he's able, to convince them? He is an illusionist. So his celebrity status has to play a role in every single step of this evaluation.
And by the way, the complaints that he sexually assaulted women on stage during live performances, multiple people around in the audience. What do you make of those claims?
Listen, one might say that if everybody saw it happen, he would never have done it? Why would he have ever done something everybody would witness? However, he makes his living with sleight of hand movements, with illusions. And so it is quite possible that some of the things that he did, while on stage, but secretly. There was an allegation, I think, that he had put his hand, in an area of a woman where it may not have been seen by the audience. And if he is so talented to be able to do tricks and fool his audience with respect to his illusions, who's to say that he could not have done it, on stage? And sometimes that gives people a power trip, right? He's able to say, I was able to do this and I fooled everybody. And maybe it's his greatest trick of all. So those kinds of claims, you have to test it. You have to be able to, ask the right questions of both the person who's making the allegation and test it against any other possible evidence, maybe other witnesses and maybe him himself.
He's claimed that there's been complaints against him before. He has claimed before that he's been falsely accused of sexual misconduct. In 2007, there was this former beauty queen, Lacey Carroll. She accused Copperfield of assaulting her on his private island, I believe in the Bahamas. FBI ended up investigating, raided his warehouse in Las Vegas. The case was closed. There wasn't any further explanation. She filed a lawsuit against Copperfield, dropped it. Copperfield's legal team said there was no settlement. She was later arrested, by the way, charged, I think it was in Washington State, with various different offenses. And in an interview with Oprah Winfrey after this investigation closed, Copperfield told her that he was the victim in all this. In 2018, when the Wrap ran the story about Carol, Copperfield said in a statement, "I've lived with years of news reports about me being accused of fabricated, heinous acts, with few telling the story of the accuser getting arrested and my innocence. Knowing that false accusers can negatively impact the believability of others are a true disservice to those who have been victims of sexual misconduct, I didn't draw attention to it." How does that complicate everything?
It certainly does. Listen, it's not that people have never made false allegations in a sex crimes case before. It can happen. I don't know enough to know whether this was or was not a false allegation. But that being said, just because one person may have made a false allegation doesn't mean that
Well,
the other 16 haven't.
I'll tell you what, Lewis, the woman I mentioned before, when she saw the reports about Carol's accusations, I believe, and allegedly, she went to the FBI to back up this woman's claims. Says she had an interview with agents, but nothing really came of it.
Interesting. There's also the idea that even if something happened, if there's not proof beyond a reasonable doubt, the FBI or the police may not be able to move forward with a case. And that is the sad truth, by the way, in many cases where something happens to somebody. And unfortunately, by the time they speak out about it, there may not be enough evidence to corroborate what had happened. Especially with the FBI, it's different from state cases. With a state case, I sometimes feel that police and prosecutors are a little bit more willing to move forward with the case, whereas the FBI, when you go federal, a lot of times they really want a slam dunk case. They don't want to lose. They want to make sure that they have a ton of evidence before they move forward. And so it is possible that the FBI felt they didn't have enough, but there might be enough for a civil case because that burden of proof is lower than beyond a reasonable doubt. And so we have to always be careful to make claims that something is false. Just because something is not able to move forward in a criminal place because you need so much proof, like I said, beyond a reasonable doubt, it doesn't necessarily mean that it did not happen. It could just mean there isn't enough evidence to move forward in that arena.
I want to end this conversation with Jeffrey Epstein, because you might remember that David Copperfield was mentioned in these court documents as having connections to Jeffrey Epstein. Not that he's one of the purported people part of his sex crime ring, nothing like that. But in documents that were released earlier this year in connection with a defamation lawsuit against Epstein's former Madam Ghislaine Maxwell, one of Epstein's accusers said that Copperfield had visited Epstein in the past and testified that she met Copperfield at a dinner at one of Epstein's homes. And she says that Copperfield performed some magic tricks before asking if this woman was aware that, quote, girls were getting paid to find other girls. And she says he didn't really go into any further detail, including whether the girls were underage. But again, what do you make of that comment, that connection in light of what we're hearing now?
A lot of times we like to judge people by the company that they keep. And in society, we do that all of the time. And it's like, if you don't want to be judged the way that your friend is being judged, maybe you shouldn't be their friend. Then again, I don't really know if maybe he was just hired to perform there rather than actually, have this strong relationship. We don't really know those details. And then, of course, in the courtroom, we always want to make sure that we're not convicting people based on extraneous things, propensity evidence. Sure. Where there's smoke, there's fire. That's really not allowed in a courtroom. And so, if these claims were to move forward criminally or civilly, they would have to be tested on its own. They would have to be tested on its own evidence with its own, people. And, as much as we would like to potentially say in society, we do this, we make assumptions about people and we judge them based on their company. In a courtroom, it really does have to be solely evidence-based, and that's what the jury would have to be told.
And I believe Copperfield's lawyers have said that he was not aware of anything Jeffrey Epstein was involved in, no crimes, only learned about them when the media and the press came forward. But one of the lawyers for an alleged Epstein victim, Brad Edwards, said in a tell-all book, this is our understanding, that he had served Copperfield with a subpoena, but was unable to depose him due to a number of legal and logistical roadblocks. And, of course, even if he was able to subpoena him, doesn't mean he would be able to provide, bombshell information about Jeffrey Epstein. But it's just something to think about. And what a development, to say the least. I'm sure this is not the last we've heard of David Copperfield's name in the news right now. Sarena Townsend, good seeing you. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank
you. Appreciate it. And that is all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. As always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.